This piece was your idea. I came in later and was editing it, and we worked together a little bit on looking a little more into some of the history here, some of these excerpts, and changing the story around a little bit to just make it a little more readable for an average audience. And we went back and forth on some of the visions and what these guys were actually saying, because they're obviously our focus is on the individual right concept, but there are some other interesting debates during the period about the extent of the Second Amendment and what it protects. But I'm interested in how you decided to do this story. You're the one who initiated this piece. What was it that made you want to write about this?
Well, for one, it actually didn't start off as an idea for an article. What happened was, again, I'm perpetually online, probably too much, and I get into way too many arguments about the Second Amendment. And one I've seen over and over and over is this idea that the gun lobby, aka at the time the NRA, invented the individual rights view, that it was never, the Second Amendment was never seen as protecting an individual right until circa the 1960s, 1970s with the NRA. And then, conservative legal writers started pushing this view, and then and it culminated in Scalia embracing it with Heller. So it's a fraud. And the problem is, this would normally not be taken seriously, except it's been lended credibility by no less than a Supreme Court justice, the Chief Justice.
I have the quote here in front of me. The gun lobby's interpretation of the Second Amendment is one of the greatest pieces of fraud, I repeat the word fraud, on the American people by special interest groups that I have seen in my lifetime. And that's former Chief Justice Warren Burger. And he said that in 1991 during a PBS interview. Yeah. And it has been cited repeatedly in popular media, right? Like, I feel like this debate has left the realm of, academics and the legal field, right? You don't see anyone trying to make this debate in court filings anymore because the Supreme Court has settled it essentially in 2008. But you still see this all the time in popular media, in my realm, right? In newspapers and magazines. You'll see this constantly, and certainly on Twitter, you'll see the dumbest down version of it that you could, just like everything else on Twitter. You get the lowest common denominator version of this, but it's still extremely popular. You also say you found an article from The Intercept just as recently as June 2022, so a couple months back, that was perpetuating the same idea, and so obviously this is something you can test, right? It's not an abstract concept and an abstract theory. Like, did the gun lobby invent this concept that the Second Amendment protects an individual rights in, the late 1990s or what have you? Or was this an idea that was around for much longer? And so you started to look, you started to do that exact research, right? Why don't you just walk us through real quick how you the methodology for finding these references, because we found quite a lot.
Yeah. So what I used to do is I would look to the founders, the famous Tench Cox quotes. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right. Madison and Federalist.
No one's
46.
Ever sure.
Yeah.
He's not around anymore to tell us.
Yeah. Unlike me, he can't correct his name pronunciation, but Madison and Federalist 46. And of course, there's all the case law that the Supreme Court, as we mentioned in the article, has already gone through. I'm sure maybe there's more out there, but the Supreme Court has done a pretty thorough historical examination of what courts have ruled. So what's missing in this is...
So those are the first two, right?
Yeah.
There's two ways you can look at it. What did the founders say? Mm-hmm. And what have the courts said over, during that early Republic era?
Right.
And even through up till the modern times. The Supreme Court looked at all sorts of legal history on the Second Amendment when it did its major cases. But there's a third way, right? And what's that?
And the third way is, what did people in the generations immediately after the founders say about the Second Amendment? Some of whom knew the founders. Some of these people we cited, the earliest ones, were contemporaries. Others came later in the 19th century. But thanks to how records have now been digitized, it's actually very easy to go to Google Books or Google Scholar, and maybe there's other competitors out there, and you can text search for phrases and words, and you can constrain it to years. And you still have to dig through a lot, as I mentioned before the show to you. A lot of times you'll have to shift through dozens of texts that are just quoting the Second Amendment without any analysis. So you do have to dig through to find them, but they are there. As our article established, there
Right.
were. I was shocked, actually, because initially I only was doing a few posts. It's all in my original Twitter thread that the article arose from, and it was just a few. And then every once in a while I'd get bored, or I'd see that stupid Warren Berger quote and go back to the well and keep searching for more. And even now, as of last week, I was finding more of them. So there is a lot out there, and I think it's accessible for the first time in history, frankly, because before, these texts, especially the more obscure ones, would only really be available to historians and archives. You'd have to go
Right.
somewhere where they had a physical copy of the book and read it. Now anyone can look, and that's
Yeah,
huge.
and looks, this isn't an exhaustive search necessarily.
No, it's not.
We're not trying to say that it is. It's pretty extensive. We have quite a lot of sources that you've managed to find this using this methodology, but obviously it's limited to what's in Google Books,
Yes.
which is not going to be every piece of literature ever written. It is quite a lot, though. To be fair, Google has done a pretty amazing job of digitizing, these archives that exist at a lot of schools and academic institutions across the country and the world. So it's not a limited arc. It's not that small. It's not some tiny, only the most famous people's writings
Right.
ended up in here. There's quite a lot of people that even historians, are not often reading their works or citing their works. So while there has been other research into this area before, of course, I think
I mentioned David Cobb. Coble,
David Kopel's done work on this. I
Great
think back maybe a decade or so ago.
1998.
But even that's so maybe two or 3 decades ago.
Yeah.
But, that stuff is still relatively obscure in the sense that it's not as widely known and published as like a lot of the founders' quotes you'll find all over the place. Tench Cox is all over the gun rights side of the internet.
And I should probably say for David, sorry to cut you off there, but David, if you're listening, I swear I didn't steal your idea. I found out about your article after I had done all this. In fact, if I found your article, I might not have ever done it. But I did see that I did find, probably thanks to the digitization, which he didn't have back in 1998, I did find some obscure ones that Mr. Koppel did not reference. So
it's sort of building on that. And this is not meant to be an academic
it's not
review. It's meant to be for public consumption to address a fairly limited idea here, which is just showing that this is not a new idea. It's just a bottom line, the conclusion of the piece. This isn't a modern invention. This concept that the Second Amendment protects the right to keep and bear arms for all individuals is not something that the NRA came up with or David Kopel invented or whoever else, right?
Right.
This is something that has been in popular belief since the founding, basically. And this sort of conversation among second generation Americans that we're going through in our piece, just proves that beyond a shadow of a doubt, frankly.